Welcome to Freedom of Speechless. We are excited today to bring you another podcast explaining the inside thoughts and tendencies of our non-speaking apraxic community straight from the inside thoughts and poking out their truths right here on the letterboard. So we're excited. We're going to talk about understanding loops and stims in, again, not really looking at a diagnosis, but usually we're looking at autistic children in these situations. Mm-hmm. So with that, I always like to just kind of take us to that place. So we're going to just imagine ourselves being in a situation that we are walking to the sink and then walking back to the table and walking to the sink and walking back to the table and walking to the sink and walking back to the table and walking to the sink and walking back to the table and walking to the sink and walking back to the table and walking to the sink and walking back to the table. How many times can I do that before you guys are going, okay, enough? Okay, we get it. You've walked to the sink and you're walking back to the table.
Right.
Well, that would be called a loop when our body gets stuck in a cycle that it cannot get out of. Mm-hmm. And as much as we may have thought that that was a little bit
maybe intentional
or whatever I was doing there, what we're seeing with these kids is that it's not intentional for them. Mm-hmm. They're stuck on that path of walking to the sink and walking to the table and walking to the sink. So we're going to explain a little bit about that today and trying to understand why that happens. So with that said, we're going to also talk about the difference between loops and stims. Do you want to touch a little bit about that based on like what you feel a difference of, you know, what people see as a stim versus, you know, what I just did as a loop. Yeah.
So I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to go back to the first week. We talked about apraxia, what apraxia was. It is a motor impairment. It causes a brain to body disconnect. You guys touched, you and Isabel last week touched a little bit on presuming competence. So presuming that an individual's brain is cognitively wanting to engage the way that a neurotypical individual would want to engage with their surroundings, their environment, their peers, etc. Okay, so just laying that foundation down, then you would have to look at any repetitive action. And when I say action, I mean there's I'm not going to give names, but there's a friend of ours, and he needs you to constantly talk about how he had these aides that worked with him years ago, and he has to always say, "No, Alexis, just Hannah. No, Alexis, just Hannah." And then you have to tell him, no, Alexis, just Hannah. He hasn't had these aides in like 10 years.
Right.
But he's in this loop, right? And so you're thinking like this is intentional speech. He even writes down his loops. Like he'll write them out.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's kind of a blurred line a little bit when you're looking at an individual that's stimming and you're looking at an individual that's looping. There's verbal loops where it's just, okay, I'm going to say this and I need you to say that to complete this loop. Okay. Or I'm going to do this. And once I'm done, I can move on with whatever it is that I'm doing. You know, stims.
Wait, before you move on, because I love that you did that right there, because I want to now give the definition of what an actual loop is. Okay. The definition of a loop is a structure, series, or process that ends in which the connection begins. So it's like the speech comes out and it ends up going straight back to the same exact connection that it started with.
Right.
So I want to kind of, you know, make sure that we know that definition with what you just showed, because that was really perfect with that. It's just constantly bringing back to the same beginning thought and never actually being able to sequence anything past.
Right. Well, it's kind of like if you have, you know, like old school, like your old school iPod, you know, and you would have it on loop. Well, eventually the same thing is going to play. And then, you know, it's going to loop to another song and another song, but then it's going to come back to the beginning and it's going to loop and it's going to loop. So it's just engaging in the same repetitive action or looks like conversation, you know.
Right.
But a stim it could be pacing. It could be flapping your hands. It could be waving your fingers in front of your face. You know, there's verbal stims. See, and this is where it gets tricky, where like I'm talking to you about, you know, something that, you know, an individual, okay, we have to go through this script, and then you have to answer the question this way, and then I'm okay. But then I'm going to have to ask you that question, and you're going to have to answer it that way, and then I'm okay. And usually it is because of some sort of anxiety producing environment. Not always, but usually. And so that's the way of I've been told by some other non-speakers, some of Angelo's friends, that's the way I control that situation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to go to the airport, and the airport is going to fly us on a plane, and we're going to fly on the plane. And what plane are we going to fly on, Mom? Okay. And Mom's got to give an exact answer.
Right. Now here.
And we're not going to the airport.
Yeah, no, we're going to the airport. We're the grocery store.
I know what I'm saying, right.
We're in the grocery store.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
yeah,
you know.
But it still makes them feel safe in that environment, giving them a structure.
Right.
Of like almost, again, creating that loop.
Right.
And jumping in that circle.
Right.
Like, whoop, I got some boundaries set.
Yeah.
I know I'm on the airplane. I know I'm with the attendant. I know I'm.
Yeah.
And, you know, nobody else needs to necessarily understand what I'm going through because I really don't want to push myself into unnecessary stimulation. You know?
So with verbal loops, there's a difference between a verbal loop and I guess a verbal stim. My son has a lot of issues with verbal stims. And so he will talk about movie scripts a lot, and it's just chatter. So more recently, I look at him and I'm like, now that's a stim, right? It's a stim, but it could be viewed a little loopy because
it could turn into a loop if it becomes
autoplay.
You know, and really going into like how loops are created before you go into your story with this is that it's a constant. Crevice that's being caused in that neuroplasticity of the brain, a neural pathway that's being caused for that thought process to continue. Yeah. And unfortunately, that neural pathway has now turned into a circle, which just keeps him going instead of it flowing out of the mouth as it automatically
instead of going upward and
us.
Outward, it's backing up.
Yes.
And there's nowhere for it to filter. It just keeps going.
And it's comfortable sometimes, and it's self-stimulatory, but then it becomes a loop. So that's where there's that fine line between how much do we really want to allow, you know, in that sensory window to help soothe the child. I mean, this is really what we're talking about here is helping the child feel regulated. Right. Not necessarily, how can we deal with their loops or how can we stop them from stimming? Right. That is not what we're talking about today. No. Today we're talking about why are they doing that? Is there ways, and we're going to get into that in the next podcast, you know, some of the ways to help these loops. But we want to help you understand what they are, how they happen, why they happen. And then we're going to go into, you know, some different strategies on how to pull away from the loop, build those new neural pathways, and move forward with that. Right. So go ahead, go into that story now with Angelo.
So with stimming, so, you know, Angelo will recite a movie line or a TV show line. And so I'll look at him and I'll go, what movie is that from? And he'll look at me and automatically his automatic motor response is no. I go, no, what movie is that from? Tell me. And he'll say like Over the Hedge or Night at the Museum or whatever. So like I'm breaking, and then he like looks at me like, thank you. Thank you for stopping that from happening. So, you know, as parents, I think that we're really good at, what's the word I'm looking for?
Enabling.
Thank you. Yeah.
With love, for love.
Yeah.
And compassion. You know what I mean?
But I think that as much as we're there to cuddle them and be their safety net, I think that we are also very innovative. And I think that you can almost figure out a way in any situation, depending on what your child's loop is, on how to be like, okay, how do I intervene here? How do I kind of break that cycle? You know, I've had spellers who are like, just let me do it, and then kind of redirect me out of it. I have spellers that have said, stop it, just stop it for me. So until you have open communication, it's kind of hard to really gauge what that individual needs. But I can definitely say that when you're looking at, this is part of the presuming competence, when you're looking at your child engage in self-stimulatory behavior, repetitive movements, repetitive behavior, repetitive speech, they don't want to do that.
Right.
So, and it's not intentional.
Right.
It's not indicative of what they want, who they are, or anything like that. You know, Angelo will tell me, like, he'll always be like, iPad, iPad, iPad. Then you put a letterboard in front of him. He's like, take this thing away from me, smash it, burn it, get rid of it. You know, it's like, it's like crack. Like, he's like, get it away from me.
Right.
But as he's like, give me the iPad. right.
Wait, so, do you want the iPad? You know what it is.
Right. It's like, thank God for this. No, I do not want the iPad. Right. Yes. So it's hard. You're like, what do I do? And just kind of to kind of sum it all up is, you know, really when it comes down to it is trying to figure out how to keep your child regulated, and also just giving them a replacement for the loop.
Without causing another loop.
You got it.
Yeah. And I think that goes to, like, okay, so I wrote here that one of the things I really wanted to get out there was stims are often self-regulatory, while loops can feel more like being trapped in a cycle. So the fine line that I think you're just talking about is, how do we not make the stim, which is self-regulatory, so it's keeping the body regulated, but not allowing it to become a cycle or a loop.
Right.
And, you know, and that's what we're going to discuss and what we're going to touch some base on and do that, you know, in these future podcasts and what they've taught us.
Right.
What Angelo and Josh have taught us. I'll go into an example really quick that Josh actually gave me during our last session. We're working really hard on independent typing. We've pulled back from the keyboard and put him back on a little bit less motor demand for this next level of completely backing away from him, being no boundary for him, so that eventually he can have a keyboard in front of him without a human being. That's where we're at with him, but we're using, you know, a little bit less motor demand so that he can focus on some other things and not those small letters. Okay, so that's a whole nother story. But I asked, he kept going to the W. Now, this was a loop. This is not something he normally does with me. So as I was, you know, spelling with him, I said, Josh, do you have something to say to me? Because he is an open communicator on the letterboard. So maybe he did have something that he wanted to express to me. So I said, do you have something to say to me? I gave it to him and he said, no. W is a loop. To stop W stimulates my nerves. I either do it touchless, impulsively, or I need touch. So what he was telling me was, I'm either going to need touch or need a little boundary. Otherwise, I'm going to loop into that W. So can you give me a strategy? Can you help me to not loop into that W?
Yeah.
And so I added some different prompts and some different things that we know to do in order to help him to avoid going to the W, so that he doesn't build this constant river down to the W that we don't want him to build.
Right.
Instead, if I just give him the proper letter to pull him away from that W, he fluently continues the rest. Right. And of course, we're in a lesson where we're in known, you know, answers and things like that. So as we're learning skills, just like pitching into that, you know, glove, is you're on the mound, just pitching. So until you can acquire more skill. So that's kind of where we are with him. But, you know, that was really great. I was so blessed that I was able to ask him, hey, what's going on, dude? What's going on? Do you need to tell me something? And truth is that without having those boundaries and having all this new skill, my nerves are on super stimulated overload. And I'm either overstimulated or understimulated, which may cause a loop or may cause needing stimulation and self-regulation.
To speak to like the scientific, you know, to get real in depth, but I'm going to keep it real short, but just the science behind a loop is your neural pathways myelinate based upon the actions that your body are continually doing. And so milestones are gained through myelination, through your neural pathways being stimulated, right? You learn how to tie your shoes, you learn how to ride a bike, you learn how to write your name, all these things. You learn how to drive a car. through repetitive action.
Yes.
And so those are intentional movements that are building praxis that cause the myelination in your brain to be able to do those without thinking about it. But when you have a sensory system that is driving your motor system, you now are looking for ways to self-soothe. And where a stim is soothing, you could really develop a stim into looping and looping and looping, because your sensory system is craving just to be calmed down, just to be regulated. And now now you have almost a chemical response. Oh, well, when I do this, I'm calm. So I'm just going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. It's not their cognitive brain thinking this. It's the sensory system in their body.
Right.
And the motor, it's the motor response in the body with the sensory system driving it. Loop, loop. Oh, you feel calm. Loop, loop.
Right.
Oh, you feel calm. So now you have to think of a new way. And when I say breaking that and you got to think of a new way now to help your child myelinate new neural pathways,
right,
to regulate and do X, Y, and Z while breaking this loop.
Yeah. And again, this will be the time that we say, this is where you subscribe.
Yes.
You like, you share, you comment. Let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know what you want us to touch on.
Yeah.
We didn't introduce ourselves, but I'm Katie Custer.
And Melody Rabora.
And I'm a practitioner here at Mind Over Body, and I work with non-speaking individuals to help them communicate on a letterboard, coaching the motor system and regulation at the same time to bring open communication here at Mind Over Body. And Melody runs Angela's Angels for communication. You can find us at mobstrong.com.
Angela'sAngels.com over here.
So we're doing a lot to help them let us know how to help them.
You got it.
Instead of just jumping in and letting you know what we think about loops and stimulation and that kind of thing. And whether it's okay or not okay.
Right.
So that's really important that you guys subscribe for them, because this is their channel. Freedom of Speechless is for them.
Yeah.
We're advocating for the First Amendment right of being able to have a voice and as a non-speaker. So
communication choice.
That's exciting. So I think that we really touched a lot on, what the loops are, kind of getting stuck in those cycles.
Yeah.
Kind of going off your last story, just to break it down into a little bit of like an analogy for maybe how we can understand it, past medical science, is like a river. So a river starts as dry land until water runs through it. And the more and more water runs in that same pathway, the more the river is going to have a deep crevice, and the water will run more freely without spreading out and dispersing. It will coagulate, run freely, and get to where it needs to go. And, if there are boulders or there are rocks in the way,
gotta work its way around it.
Well, it will cut through those boulders. It will. Water is going to penetrate those boulders. It will cut through. It's actually, that mechanical that it would cut through that rock so that the river could
might
run
get
through.
backed up a little first, though.
It might get backed up a little first. You got it. And it might need repetitive over and over and over and over and over and over until we make a little tiny headway over that rock. We're constantly bringing new rivers, new pathways
100%.
to get to the goal that we're looking for, as opposed to as soon as we hit that rock or as soon as we hit that boulder, they're going into the loop again because their water veers off. So, that's something that we can kind of look at. It's not that they mean to veer off. It's not that they want to loop. Even if they want to self-stimulate, they do not want to be doing things like picking their fingers or stimming in public. They will if they have to, but it's not something that they want to do.
No.
So we're going to work a little bit next week on redirecting with choices, breaking loops, pattern interrupting, teaching alternative coping strategies for these kids, managing stimulation and stimming. I am identifying the function of where the stimming is coming from and why they're stimming. I'm encouraging safe stimming. So, there's a way that, if we do feel that that's needed for regulation at the time, at least maybe for the moment. Maybe they'll work their way out of that. That we can help them do that safely, and then respecting the need for stimming, supportive environments, and using positive reinforcement, and how to coach the body, how to coach the yes as opposed to coaching and talking the no.
Yeah.
That's huge. So with that being said, I'll put out a call to action to everybody. I want you to think of one stim or one loop that you possibly do, which could be maybe biting your nails, picking your hair,
Shaking your leg, tapping a pencil, clicking your fingers, whatever.
You got it.
Scratching your face.
You know, we're not going to give you it all. We're not going to give it you all. We want you to think about it. Because for some reason, we just don't think we do that. But we don't think we do that because it's a loop. And it happens automatically. And we're not thinking about it when we do it. So I want you to think about that. It will help you understand the inside of our non-speaking apraxic individuals a little bit closer to their loops and stimulations, why they do them, how they do them, and you know, how we can help them through that. So instead of trying to stop the behavior, let's focus on supporting the need behind that behavior and helping this community have a voice. So thanks so much for listening. Until next time, God bless.
See you later. God bless.